every time. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Hancock.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks for everybody watching at home. And for those of you that are continuing to watch from the panel discussion we just had, some of that advice that Rod just mentioned as far as staying in the moment, man, that's such a great tool, because there's times, whenever you're, at Game 7 of the World Series and, you're feeling anxiety, you're feeling everything that's going on. It's an electric moment, and you just, you have to kind of make sure that you haven't bumped a setting on your camera. You weren't supposed to be at, 2,000th of a second on shutter speed. Next thing you change to shoot something in the stands, and you're back at 500th of a second. You'd be overexposed for the field. It's just important to stay in the moment and just kind of not let the stage get too big. And the funny thing we were talking about was celebration, ejection, and the course of building relationships. And probably one of the most important parts of that is knowing when to shoot, but also knowing when not to shoot. So there's times this past year I was covering the Astros again in the postseason, covering them against the Boston Red Sox, and the Astros ended up losing at home. And I've got a picture with Carlos Correa, who's right there, Jose Altuve, and Alex Bregman, and they're all three at the entrance to the steps of the dugout watching the Red Sox celebrate on the field, and just kind of the dejection that they had. And I took 2 frames. I just saw them, I stopped 1, 2, and then just got out of the way, because I think those were important storytelling frames. And I've got relationships with one of those guys, especially Correa, where I'll show that to him sometime in the off season, almost not just to kind of remind him of what happened, but I know Carlos, and he's very, very competitive, so I will use that to actually kind of fuel him. And he'll just kind of go back to that thought and remember, you don't want to let that happen again, because, these guys are very, at least some of them anyways, are hyper competitive. Carlos is certainly one of those guys. I started working with him after he won Rookie of the Year, as he's training in Puerto Rico. And the first time we're out there, he's doing all these plyometric exercises on the beach. And he's like, Hancock, I bet you can't do this. Hancock, I bet you can't do that. And I said, no. I said, but you see that island over there? And he's like, yeah. I said, get us 2 kayaks. I'm going to whip your butt to the island and back. The next day we went kayaking. I did win the race, but it's one of those things where these guys always want to compete, and so if you're able to develop a rapport with them and be able to fire back a little bit, it works. It's a lot of fun. And so through the course of doing that, you develop relationship, you build trust. And so this was the year that they won the World Series. This is during the ALCS against the Yankees. It's him and his younger brother, who I believe is now signed, was drafted by the Astros, just playing pickup basketball before the game. He just likes to stay loose. The other thing he likes to do, like you saw in the last picture and in this picture, he likes to stick to routine. And this is the fun thing in creative storytelling is, everybody's always so caught up with what happens on the field. I'm really interested in what happens away from the field. But even when you're on the sidelines, keeping your head on a swivel, looking at the dugout, looking at the bench, looking at the fans, because those are oftentimes creative storytelling moments that you want to show. And so this is Carlos while his backyard batting cage was being built during the ALCS. It wasn't finished yet, and so he would go to a public batting cage in Houston with his dad. And so again, sticking to routine. I've got photos of them doing this in Puerto Rico as well, but this is before I think Game 2 of the ALCS, and he's just out there taking batting practice with his dad, sticking to things he's known all the way he's growing up. This was his last off season. I'm hoping to get down to Houston, do some more work with him again later this month, early next month, before they go back to spring training. And him, when nobody else is watching, he's just in there grinding it out with a couple of his guys, the trainer, and just constantly working and working and working. Right now it's a time with an athlete, especially a baseball player, as they get ready for spring training. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, the bulking up, so they can develop size, because some of these guys, they're going to lose size. Some of them will lose 10 to 15 pounds over the course of a season just because it's so long. So these are different little storytelling aspects that for me, it's a lot of fun to show and just kind of get a glimpse of the behind the scenes and not show what everybody normally gets to see. And then also just trying to fuel yourself to always be creative and look for a different picture that nobody else is looking for. This is during the Astros victory parade through downtown Houston. And so I forget how many hundreds of thousands of people were there. It's by far the loudest environment I've ever been in. My ears were ringing for 3 days afterwards, because you have all these tall buildings and it's just so loud, and all the screaming, and it's just everything echoes in off of everything. So we're having to walk beside these fire trucks that these guys are on. and a lot of people will just kind of stay to the front and walk backwards. And I certainly grabbed that shot as well. But as I was circling back around, and the trophy got passed back to Carlos, as they just kind of keep circulating it on the fire truck, and he lifts it up at one point, and I see a little glimmer of something. And I sometimes tell people, if you want to be a great photographer, you kind of have to be part redneck. You got to notice shiny things in the backgrounds and be easily distracted. And so I'm like walking along, and I see a little bit of a reflection. At that point, I'm just like, boom, laser focused. I'm just kind of walking alongside and just kind of barely trying to keep my peripheral vision on what's in front of me so I don't run into something. And I'm just kind of waiting for him to lift it again. And next thing he lifts it, and I start to see it, and I just know I have to get a little bit lower. And I just drop to my knees and just do, and get that one shot where I can get the reflection of his face in the bottom of the commissioner's trophy. So it's just trying to kind of break away from the pack and go and tell a story, try to shoot a picture that somebody else hasn't seen. And sometimes I'm traveling with a lot of really heavy lights. I use a lot of light to tell story, add emotion, add drama. This kid here, young man, he's probably going to be the #1 pick in the NHL draft this year. I was doing a story for ESPN the magazine on him and his brothers. His older brother Quinn was drafted this last draft, I think 7th or 8th. Jack here is projected to be #1, and his younger brother is also projected to be #1 pick in the draft whenever he goes in 2 more years. And so normally I'd be, have 8, 10 lights. Like when we were talking with Jen, sometimes you only have 5 minutes. And if you listen to Joey Terrell earlier, he's the same thing. He's like, sometimes you only have just a couple of minutes to tell a story to get the portraits. 8, 10 lights, we can have one setting, and the athlete can sit there, and I can do 4 different lighting schematics based on how to do it just by changing different channels on what I want to trigger and when, tell a story. But this one's simple. It's a D850 with a 105mm lens, which is one of my favorite portrait lenses, and an open garage door. Just letting some soft light come in, and we had a nice setup as him and his brothers were playing hockey in the garage. And on that one, I do have a light just to kind of pump a little light in there, but then when I turned it off and we had that left garage open, that's all I saw. I was like, this is perfect. But it's fun just to be able to see these guys. I was hoping that maybe we could get them to a little local rink, but it was going to be covered. But whenever I got to the house and I met them, and they kind of showed me around, and I saw this setup, I was like, we don't need to go anywhere. This is exactly what we need to do. This is, playing hoops with your old man in the backyard. I mean, it's the same thing with these kids. This is where they play. This is where they spend the bulk of their time whenever they're not on the rink. And again, it's just, trying to get places, be one of the first ones there. This was our Cinderella team with Loyola during March Madness this past year. And I was fortunate to cover them in the first and second rounds when they were playing in Dallas. And just, again, reaction in March Madness is one of the key things I'm looking for, and they showed plenty of it. Got some great stuff as they won their game. I believe this is a second-round game to get them through to the Sweet 16. But as soon as I got my stuff on the court, I sprinted off the court through the tunnels, again, making friends like we talked about last time with making friends with the security and stuff like that, so they know who you are. Whenever you come on a mad dash, they're not going to be shocked and want to stop you like, oh, I reckon who that is. They're going to go ahead and let him go. And so I'm able to make a mad dash, get back to the locker room before all the other media gets there so I can have a good angle on what I think they're going to do whenever the player arrives, wait for them to come in. Sure enough, the last player to come in had been doing a TV interview. Everybody in there was waiting for him, and then they opened up the door, and I was the only one in position. They swung it open, and they start dumping all the water. So it's just trying to, be quick on your feet, always be thinking about the next picture. And again, more reaction stuff. That's what makes this a lot of fun. It's great whenever you make a really awesome peak action moment, whether it's a play at the second, a play at home, the ball on the fingertips. But for me, I just love emotion. Because for me, I'm a very emotional shooter. I feel a lot. I just kind of, that's how I've always operated. And for me, that's really what moves the needle. And just kind of, I feel a lot more engaged whenever I'm seeing that stuff. It's just, really invigorating to watch excitement like that. And then also a little bit of dejection. And again, using light for creative storytelling. So these are a couple guys that play football at Texas A&M. We got our quarterback, Kellen Mond, and then forget his name all of a sudden, but probably also because I can't see the number. But, I like to use a variety of lighting. So this is all off one setup that I would have, and these are 2 different looks I'd be able to get out of it, because it's all about trying to, be creative, especially when you have a narrow window of time and say, all right, how can I use lighting to try to be creative? And then there's other times whenever you want to pull out a toy. So I've got two little girls that are 3 and 6, and they're running around the house, and I was starting to get in preparation mode for this shoot, and my youngest comes up with this little, toy camera that she has a little funky lens on it, and it doesn't, it's one of those things you can turn and it changes the view. And so she comes up to me, she's like, "Daddy, I'm gonna take your picture." And I was like, "Let me see that." And so I kind of took it and grabbed my camera and held it up to that. And I was like, "Oh, Daddy's got to borrow this for work, sweetie." And so I took it with me. And so that's Tyrell Dodson, who's a linebacker for A&M. He's going in the draft this year. And I was like, "All right, guys, we're gonna get a little freaky and try something else a little different," and took that, and everybody's like, "Holy cow, they love it." So it's fun to then engage the athletes. It's one thing if I take a picture and I really like it, it's a lot of fun whenever I can share that picture and then watch the excitement of the subject. And so something we alluded to last time is using the technology in the cameras, and that's something that's really fun. Sometimes I like to go way left and shoot analog and shoot 4x5 film. I'm about to dust off the old F6 because I've got some the first run of Ektachrome, so I'm going to do some projects with slide film. But at the same time, it's using the technology that's coming out in these cameras that makes storytelling so exciting. And so this was a project I did for Nikon and the Mets this past year, and this is an in-camera overlay function. And whenever I started off, I was all wet darkroom. So I shot film until my very first job out of college, and I picked up a D2H for the first time. And that was the first time I ever shot digital. And so for me, I've always tried to push the equipment that I had at my disposal as far as I could. And as technology's improved, it's made that even more challenging to try to push the camera to its limits, to the point now, especially like with the D850, the camera starts pushing me back a little bit. And it's trying to challenge me to go further and say, all right, what do I have to do to try to push this camera, which is a lot of fun. And so when I shot film, I always loved doing multiple exposures. Take a picture, don't advance the frame, take another picture over it. And then I'd get something in the darkroom, and maybe it's you take 2 pictures and you stack them on the developer before you shoot it down onto the paper. And just another way to do a multiple exposure. At that point, you're looking at an overlay. And that's what this is in camera. You get a raw file from it. And so we went down to spring training. We shot portraits with 2 players. And we had this idea kind of nailed out in advance because I'd done it for an album cover for a country music singer about 2 weeks prior. And I was like, wait, this is a great idea. I've got to do this on this Nikon project. Convinced Nikon to let me do it. So we did the portraits down in Port St. Lucie, Florida. The next day we flew to New York. The day after that, we finally had a little bit of a break in the weather. We got up and we did the aerials. And so I was able to go through, select the frame that I wanted from the silhouette, and then go through, select the frame from the aerial, put everything together in one picture. And just try to find a different way that you can kind of tell a story, show a little bit of the hint of the face, show different areas of the city, and just have some fun pushing this technology and finding out ways that you can use it to tell a story. And so at the same time, as I'm doing this, I'm always trying to think about what's next. How else can I use this technology? How else can I apply this to what I do? And so with some of the work I do for ESPN, one of the things I want to do is, trying to make a pitch to the editors for doing something for the body issue. And so I worked with a model in Los Angeles, and I hit the road and drove around California and tried to find different scenes that I could do this with. And so took that, what we had, went up to Bristol to meet with the editors and kind of present them. So it's always kind of an evolution, an ongoing process for me. And so this is the start of my experience with the Z camera. So I took this, did the work for Nikon back in August. Happy with the pictures that came out with it, but again, it's the story behind it that makes it all interesting for me, because everything that could go wrong with the shoot went wrong. And so another part of being a great photographer and being creative is you have to be a problem solver. Whenever the wheels come off, how are you going to fix it? How are you going to put everything back together to where you make sure you deliver an image for your client? And so this was when we really kind of got to play around with the camera, what it was capable of doing. This is the first day out with it. It's a CrossFit gym in Honolulu. Originally, we were going to be working with a sprinter in Arizona. He ended up having to back out, and we were going to take him then to Hawaii and do some work there. And then so when the wheels fell off, I was like, all right, well, I need to get some people. We ended up finding 4 American service members out there working that were able to give us a time. So that's in a CrossFit gym. We got 2 representatives from the Navy there, and just were able to travel like I normally wouldn't travel. Normally I'm bogged down with multiple D5s, multiple D850s, a lot of heavy glass, but I was like, all right, I want to travel light. And I'm also traveling with a lot of lights, but I was like, all right, instead of traveling with big lights, I just want to travel with speed lights. So we traveled with speed lights, 2 Z cameras, the 35 millimeter, and then just kind of my staple lenses that I would use, and just pair that with the FTZ adapter. This is whenever we got back to Dallas. I had a couple days. I love doing slow shutter panning, and so we drove around downtown Dallas for about an hour until I kind of found this scene. It's the 105 millimeter lens, and I've got one of my assistants holding a speed light and just doing some panning and just trying to find some really fun graphic colors that we can use to show some speed, show some motion. And then also take it underwater. And so it's just another thing to have a camera that can perform as well as it can in low light. At this point, I'm trying to push the camera through all its paces on how I'd normally do it. Can I make this camera fail, or is it going to make me fail? What's going to happen? And so take it underwater, and a test like this, I want to see what's going to happen with dynamic range. How can I push it and pull it? Took it into the studio for a day. Again, I love doing multiple exposures. And the neat thing with this one was getting used to the optical viewfinder. When I worked on the D850 project, someone asked me, said, but this isn't a mirrorless. Everybody wanted to see a mirrorless. And for me, I was like, I look at enough screens all the time. Why do I want to look at another screen, which is through a viewfinder? And that all changed whenever I picked up the Z7, and that electronic viewfinder is just so sharp, so clear. It was about a 5-minute adjustment, and I'm just working with like I always would. But the neat thing was whenever I kicked it into multiple exposure mode in the studio, I took one picture, I went to go take the second one, and it's already ghosted the first image at 50% over it. So I can see exactly where that's composed and know right where I'm going to make my second exposure. I was like, man, technology makes this fun. And that's the great thing is, companies continue to push each other, is that's just great for photographers. Again, just kind of using some lighting, trying to add a little drama. Just want to put this through its paces. My D850 is my workhorse, especially in studio. I was like, all right, well, I want to see what the Z can do in studio, and it passed every test I could throw at it. We're back in Hawaii. The entire time we were there, one reason why we wanted to go to Hawaii, we were looking at Aruba because we got to shoot this in August. And then I got to thinking, I was like, well, the Caribbean, that's hurricane season, so maybe we shouldn't look at this. And then we were going to be in Arizona. I'm like, all right, it's going to be cheaper to go from Arizona to Hawaii than it would be Arizona to Aruba. So we get everything set up. After the wheels fall off, we finally regroup. We get some models that we need, get everything set up, and then right after everything's done, Hurricane Hector forms. And so it makes its way all the way across the Pacific, goes right by the south side of the islands. And what it did for the entire week is it just flooded everything with clouds. So we got 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the most, on one morning the entire week we were there where we actually had any glimpse of sunlight. And so it's kind of one of those things, we saw how the clouds were starting to break, the sun was coming up. And at this point, our model gets out there. She's an Air Force. And next thing you know, my assistant Alex comes by. I'm like, Alex, up the tree now. And so we're scrambling to try to climb up a tree. She's holding a 3-foot Octa with 2 SB5000s in it. And we're just pounding away for about 5 minutes while the sun is there before it's all gone. So I went back. I wanted, always want to kind of finish something that I've started. And this is Fred Curley. He's one of the top 400 sprinters in the world. I think right now he's actually ranked number 1. He won the Diamond League this past year, which is a pro level conference for sprinters. He's on the quest to break the 42-second barrier in the 400, which would just be remarkable. And I was working with him in Arizona. He was the one we were going to do on the Z project. I had to go to Orange County to shoot some horse racing in December. I was like, you know what? Arizona's on the way from Dallas. It's like, Fred, you going to be out there training? Let's do some work together. It's like, absolutely, come by. So we went out there. I've got him on the track. But I was like, let's get out. I always like doing environmental things. I want to kind of put him in the surroundings, and Arizona's a great place to shoot. So we got out, and that's the Z7, and just one bare bulb strobe coming from the side. And just getting moving around a little bit, just kind of show where he's at. This is him documenting him training because, I like hearing the stories of who someone is, and I want to show who their personality is and what they're all about, and sometimes the suffering that they have to go through because, trying to run a 42-second 400-meter sprint is, my lungs just start burning thinking about it, because of how hard and how fast your body has to be at peak performance for that kind of a distance over a quarter mile is remarkable. And so much of it comes down to the mental aspect and being able to withstand all that. And for me, I just like being a fly on the wall, develop those relationships to where they don't even notice you being around anymore, and they just get to be who they are, and they trust that I'm going to run around, stay out of the way, but then tell their story. And so all this stuff I did for him is developing relationships. We did this, he's a Nike athlete, and I was just telling stories and getting him pictures that he can use with his social media, because this is a story I want to continue to tell, because if he can break into the 42 seconds, right now I think he's running a 43:10. He holds the collegiate record in the 400 meters, but if he's going to break into 42s, he's got to be a favorite for gold in Tokyo in 2020. I asked him whenever we were there, I said, what's it going to take to win the gold? And he thinks it's going to be around 42.7. He said there's probably going to be about 5 guys that all break 42 for the race. And I can't imagine tossing a medicine ball as far as he can. It's just like, again, testing dynamic range of the Z7. Take it out in the desert, see what it can do. Just shoot some available light stuff, shoot some strobed. Just a blast of a camera to shoot. So quick, light, you can go hiking with it, no problems at all. And this gets back to more of the overlay stuff. So this was ALCS this past year, Houston and Boston. One of the days I go out and I have, I guess this is before Game 5, where the Boston ended up winning it. Normally I would have done some behind-the-scenes stuff with Correa, had some stuff set up with Alex Bregman, but when the team goes down and they're facing elimination, none of those guys want you around. And I understand. Again, it's knowing, the battles not to pick when not to take a picture. So morning free, I meet up with Chris David Garcia, who's the creative director for the Astros. We meet up for some coffee, and we just start talking and just about the creative process and what fuels us. And so at the same time, I'm thinking, man, my client was expecting me to come back with some behind-the-scenes stuff. That's normally what I do. I've still got to bring back something different for them to use. And so I've got this in my mind all morning long. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to deliver my client something different that they're not expecting? And where we were having coffee was right around from this area of downtown Houston, where they have all these graffitied buildings that are constantly rotating out. I drove by and then immediately turned right back around, parked it, started walking around, shooting all the graffiti buildings, and then having in my mind what I wanted to shoot come batting practice, come the game time. And as soon as we got to the stadium, started taking a couple of those pictures and sent a couple using SnapRidge right back to my phone. I'm able to text them to my editor in New York. What do you think about this? This is something I want to try today. I want to do a series. I think this is going to be a hit. And he looked at it and he's like, I don't know. I still want you to shoot the game too. I'm like, I'm going to shoot the game too. That's not a problem. I said, but I think we should look at this. Made a couple more of them, sent them to him. He's like, okay, these are working for me. I like this a lot. He's like, go with it. But the nice thing is you can continue to shoot like you normally shoot a game, because then after that, you're going through and you're picking your frames. And it's all through the retouch menus. You can go through, oh, I like this. Pick that one, see how it matches up with that one. Take it, can send it straight from my phone right back to him in New York. They can get up on social like that. Would have worked a lot better if Houston had won the game, but still it was fun just to kind of play around, push the camera, push the technology, see what it can do, see how it's going to push me back, and just find ways to tell stories and do it as creative as possible. Again, it would have been great one if Houston won. Alex Bregman with Iron Man. That's ended up being what happened. Certainly was an invasion, because Boston came in and just cleaned their clocks and went on to win the World Series. That's it. I love Q&A, so if anybody has any questions on how, what, let me know. Anyway? All right, yeah. What's that? The question was, do the athletes get to see the pictures? And oftentimes they will, especially if it's someone like with Correa. I'd send him a couple of pictures afterwards and like, hey, I got this, and then keep those relationships going, because, hey, he's going to get something out of it. So next time I call him up, I'm like, hey, I'm in town. Are you working? Let's do something. And I go take some more pictures. So it's just a good way to keep a good relationship going, is to share the pictures. But that's where the joy is. Yes, sir. That's a great question. The question was, what do you do with regards to the rights to the artwork with the graffiti? And for this, if it was for a commercial use, then obviously you'd have to go through, and there's little markers you can find out. I could go through and find out who was a particular artist for the artwork and do that. But then like with something like Iron Man, it gets a little more difficult because of the movie rights. But when you're doing it for an editorial outlet, like I was doing, then you don't have to worry about that. But anytime it's a commercial thing, that's rule number one that you're looking at. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Okay. Right. All right. The question was, first about shutter speeds, and then what I'm using. Second one is about kind of being in the moment with everyone else, especially at a big event. And one of those, as far as a great behind-the-scenes story, would be Game 7 of the World Series, and I'm just in this mad rush with everybody on the field after the game, and I'm wearing a Texas A&M football hat, and I get back and we're waiting to get into the locker room for the champagne celebration, and my phone's just buzzing repeatedly. I look down, and I've got hundreds of messages on Twitter, text, calls, the whole 9 yards, because apparently I was all over the TV doing all that stuff. And it was like, oh my God, Hancock's there, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, all right, guys, I got to work. And then I'm waiting to get into the locker room, and then just champagne's going everywhere. I'm drenched in champagne, and I had to remember on the way to the ballpark that day, stop, get a chamois like you would dry off your car with, so I could have it for the front of the lens, because that stuff makes it tough to shoot through. So we do that, but at that point, you're just kind of like, wow, this is nuts. And then we leave at 4:30 in the morning. I'm the last photographer out, and I'm drenched in champagne and beer. And then the hotel had messed up our reservation, so we ended up not having a hotel to go back to. So I drove 5 hours back at 4:30 in the morning, just hoping I didn't get pulled over. And the officer would be like, sir, have you been drinking? No, I was in the clubhouse with the Cubs. It was great, Sure. No, I can show you the pictures. But like when we're walking out of the game or walking out of the stadium that night, like that's when everything kind of hits you. And you start thinking back to everything that happened, and you realize how special something was that you covered. But oftentimes, my eye is glued through the viewfinder. You can still feel the electricity, but I'm glued through the viewfinder. As far as shutter speeds, typically with an action image, I'm trying to stay at least at 1,000th of a second. 2,000 is better, at least at night stuff. Day, I'll take it all the way up to 8,000. For some of the pictures, if I'm able to go back at all, nope, that toothpaste is already out of the tube. With the one picture of David Price, where he's pitching, that's actually I think a 15th of a second pan, maybe a 30th of a second pan shot as he's pitching. So on its own, it was a great image. And then whenever I found that particular picture with the head, and it was like kind of like Medusa for that overlay, the way it kind of blended together, it was just really, really perfect. So, I'll do panning. If you saw the panel presentation, the MotoGP shot that I had, that was taken at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and I think that was a 5th or a 10th of a second of a pan where I had the camera on a tripod and a fluid head and just moving it with the motorcycle. So I'll play around with all of it. So, yes, sir. Okay, the question was if I've published a photo that's had an athlete angry after they've seen it. Unfortunately, no, at least not to my knowledge. And part of it's knowing kind of when not to take a picture. I think more often than not, I see a picture and I'm angry at it because I'm very self-critical in my work. So I look at my stuff and I see everything I could have and should have done wrong. So I hate probably 98% of all my images. I just see all the flaws in them, but that also is what kind of drives me to continue to improve and be more creative, is I'll just tear apart everything that I did, and I'll say, all right, and then work my butt off to try to not make the same mistake again. So, but you try to be really careful, because there's times whenever you're going through on an edit and you'll know something, you're like, ooh, they're not going to like that. So sometimes you just like let that one never see the light of day, and that's just how it goes. So, yeah, but yes, sir.
Did you create the overlays, or did your editors do it?
The question was if I created the overlays or the editors did. I did. So that was all done with me right there on the field. And then I was able to send that to them just to kind of, so they weren't shocked and expecting one thing after the game. I was able to send it using SnapBridge from the Z7 right to my phone and text it to my editor, Nate, so he knew exactly what I was doing. I was like, hey. And that was just kind of the surprise at that point, is it's during batting practice. So I was like, check this out. This is something I think we should do. And every once in a while, I'll just kind of have to put your heels in and say, look, I think this is something worth exploring. Let's do this. Still bring home what they're expecting. But then oftentimes I want to make a picture for myself. And so I'd have that idea because I'd done the portraits with it. And I said, let's try this out. And so I'd create everything right there. No Photoshop at all. So with the Z7 and the Z6, it still gives you a JPEG when you create the overlay, but on the D850, like you saw with those portraits, it's a RAW file. So you can push the RAW file just like you would any other Nikon NEF file. I mean, it's got the great dynamic range, and it's just fantastic to work with. So yeah, it's fun because coming up with film, for me the magic has always been creating the picture in the box, not doing it with Photoshop. I don't want it to be a photo illustration. I want it to be a photograph. In a technique like this, surely in an editorial setting, you should explain it in the caption. But for me, it just comes down to the magic's trying to create it in the box, whether it's lighting or a technique like this. Yes, sir. The question was if I shoot my images pretty flat. Typically, I just kind of keep it a standard. Like if I'm doing landscapes, and that's one thing, is I'm most known for my sports stuff, but I'm a photojournalist at heart, so I like trying to do everything. So in different situations, I'll shoot different ways. Landscapes, I love shooting like in a flat profile. One of the fun things in playing around with the Z-bodies is all the different new creative picture profiles that you can create and use, and the presets that they have, from denim to bleach to all these other ways that you can then adjust that. It's almost like an entire library of Lightroom presets that you can customize everything to, and just be creative. So a lot of it just kind of depends on the situation. Most sports stuff I'm shooting in standard, and then I'll just kind of increase a little bit of the mid-tone contrast, a little bit of saturation. That's about it. So, anybody else? All right. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen.